Thanks very much for that, Shireen. Well, the market's holding, as you said, absolutely. We're about, 50, 55 points higher at this stage. And, of course, this is into the budget, so not bad after a flat kind of a start. Although I must say there are lots of single stock accidents, which I just want to quickly mention, right? Start with Aurobindo Pharma. If you can just have these four names up. Aurobindo sold off 10%. All of these news related. That's a big move on a large pharma name. There is India Cements. There was that news on Enforcement Directorate conducting searches in Chennai, 8% lower there the last I looked. Paytm, of course, from the word go this morning has been down 20. That's locked down. And there is Fusion Microfinance, which is the latest edition, which the last time I checked is down about 10% as well. As I said, we're about, 15 minutes away from the budget speech, and we'll hear from the Finance Minister. Let's welcome in our next set of panelists. We have Ashok Wadhwa, founder of Ambit, joining us here. We have Sajid Chinoy, Chief India Economist at JP Morgan, also with us. We'll be joined by Mahesh Nandurkar of Jefferies, Neelkan Mishra of Axis Bank in just a bit as well. Gentlemen, great to have all of you here. Thank you very much for your time. Ashok, we're going to start with you. First of all, it's a vote on account. And we were just talking about before we hit air, you were saying, will the speech last? How long will the speech last? You're not expecting very much, right?
No. I mean, it's a vote on account. So I think they will just do the usuals. Sunset clauses will get an extension. Hopefully not just until the budget, but a year, 2 years ahead. I don't really see many big changes happening in vote of account.
Well, Ashok, let me give the devil's argument. See, 2019 also was a vote on account, and we saw the PM Kisan Samman Nidhi announced. In 2019 also, it was very clear the BJP would win, and win even better. It's the same sentiment now. That didn't stop the government from doing income transfer announcements. So just going by historical example, precedent.
And the July budget, like in 2019, was pretty similar to the numbers they put out in the interim budget. So it was continuity in that sense. It was not wildly different. I mean, there was a very small difference.
So therefore, assuming they will treat it like a normal budget, what would you expect?
Well, if they do treat it like a normal budget, I would say there should be a very definitive plan. The taxman in me tells me that the government has done very well in terms of tax collection. 18% tax to GDP ratio is something we wouldn't have thought about 5 years ago. They've done well. They can continue to do better. But at a time when you have tax buoyancy, the banker in me tells me that you haven't done so well. Because, we haven't met any divestment target. At a time when the market is so bullish and your valuations are so rich, I would think that government should give a very definitive plan and say we will divest IDBI by a particular date, and that we have very clearly identified targets of what we will achieve during this current year. That's been the one miss every year for the last 3 years, Lata.
No, actually, there nothing wrong with their targets. The execution has been seriously wanting.
Yeah.
Okay, let me get the economist in as well, Sajid Chinoy, member of the PMEAC and, of course, chief economist at JPM India with us. Sajid, can you make a case for a higher fiscal deficit? I know I read your report. You are stating that it should be 5.2, 5.3 because of the consolidation roadmap. But, you're doing well in terms of taxes at this point in time. Economy is doing well. And inflation is not an issue. Core inflation is actually going towards 3%. It's a good year to spend and stimulate, no? Will the 5.5 be taken very badly?
Lata, wouldn't counter-cyclical fiscal policy suggest exactly the opposite?
Okay.
So your emerging markets are very good to spend in the bad times, in crisis times. Where emerging markets need to improve is to be symmetrically counter-cyclical, which is in the good times to actually make space. So if you ask me, at a time where growth has picked up, at a time where, as was alluded to before, tax to GDP is picking up, right? What I'm looking closely at is this year's deficit numbers. And what you might find is gross tax collections at the center could be as high as 11.6% of GDP, which would be the highest in 13 years. And interestingly, the consolidation that we get this year from 6.4 to 5.9 was envisaged to happen through expenditure compression, but may well actually happen through tax buoyancy. So the way we think about it, all of the consolidation this year will be because gross tax to GDP is higher and non-tax revenues are higher. Expenditure to GDP is the same as last year. In fact, the quality is improved because CapEx could well be close to 3.4% of GDP, which is double of what happened 4 years ago. So for me, what all this tells me is this is the time to reduce the deficit and make fiscal space, stabilize debt and bring it down for the next big shock. I think the government is exactly right that the target for the next 2 years needs to be about 4.5% of GDP. And so you'd like to take a substantial chunk out of it. I think the question is going to be, if you have to bring the deficit down and still keep your leg on the capex pedal, which I think is crucial, how do you achieve that consolidation? And to the extent that the tax buoyancy that we've seen this year continues into next year, or efforts are made to make sure that happens next year, then we see less compression on revenue expenditures. I think those are the trade-offs that we need to contend with. But I do think this is the time, with growth recovering, with tax buoyancy picking up, that we reduce deficits and make space for the next shock.
Mahesh Nandurkar, who's head of research at Jefferies India, is also with us. And Ashok, you were saying as there's going to be a vote on account interim kind of budget. I know Mahesh differs. Mahesh thinks that this is going to be, a full-fledged budget. Mahesh, weigh in on that to begin with.
Yeah, it is technically an interim budget, but for all practical purposes, I think we should view this as a proper full-year budget, in my view. A couple of reasons for that. One is obviously we have a track record as to what happened in February 19, and what happened in the final budget in I think July 19. There was hardly any difference. I mean, if you just compare the numbers on certain assumptions and fiscal deficit and the other sort of capex growth and targets and things like that, there was hardly any like 0.1, 0.3, 0.5% difference. So we have that one precedent, to go with, that despite being an interim budget, I think we should view this, as a full-fledged budget. Also, logically speaking, if the same party and if the same ministers are going to be assuming, the similar roles, it will be, very difficult to argue for, a very different budget in July, as compared to February. And the consensus today is that of a political continuity. So I would take this budget seriously and budget numbers quite seriously, because I think this is going to be, the budget for the full year, according to me.
All right, Mahesh taking it very seriously, but let's get in Neelkant as well. Neelkant, what is your sense, whether this will be purely a vote on account budget, or will we see a full-fledged budget?
I think that this will be more of a vote on account, and that's also, my belief is driven by public pronouncements from leaders in the government that this will be more of a vote on account, and that's, I think, as per the protocol as well.
Okay, so now that's the entire plate of menu of expectations. One expecting a full-fledged budget, the other expecting something that would be an also ran. Sajid, assuming that they will choose to make pronouncements, what would you rather have in terms of economic growth priorities? More income transfers, more capex, can both be managed? Just in terms of economic development, your priorities and expectations.
I think it's really important to continue with the capital expenditure push. I think the benefits of that are just being seen in the economy. I think the private sector will still take some time to fully rev up, and public investment multipliers are large. So I think there should be no letting up on the pedal of that. And ideally, we've already seen a very impressive effort. If capex to GDP this year prints at 3.4% of GDP, that would be a doubling over the last 4 years. Ideally, you want to see that ratio even higher. Can you go up another 20 basis points, take it to 3.6% of GDP? So I think that should be the first priority. I think on revenue expenditures, what we've seen is in the last few years, these have gradually been coming off as a share of GDP. We're still above where we were at pre-pandemic levels. So I think maybe there's some space for rationalization over there. But there again, I think we need targeted welfare support. I think given the recovery post-pandemic, targeted welfare support will be important, and I expect to see that. I think for me, the most exciting thing is on the revenue side. As I mentioned, this could be the first year where combined tax to GDP could be above 18%. So if we can ensure that that tax buoyancy continues, and while I don't expect announcements and asset sales now, I think that is the big opportunity in the July budget. I mean, if we're not selling assets, to reduce deficits and pay down debt in these market conditions, at these valuations, when will we, right? So I think, and remember, consolidating your deficit by selling assets is the least contractionary way on growth. So what you want to do ideally is bring deficits down, power off debt, but not do so without hurting growth. And the best way to do that is through asset sales, though I do think that will be more safe for the July budget.
Although as someone in the morning, I think it was Arvind Sanger who said, right, don't say it, just do it. And I think that makes sense.
Yeah,
because
they've
if
said
you say
enough.
it, if you say it, I mean, market starts to
be
assume it's
fair
coming.
to the government, I've gone through this with a lot of divestment ministry officials. They have a huge problem taking out all the non-corporate, these institutions were set up, for instance, SAIL. It was almost the entire Bokaro city was being run, or the entire Bhilai city was getting run. To just, like in BSNL, take away the land, take away all the other non-corporate items, assets, liabilities, and then, just the corporate entity has to be divested. It's becoming a huge problem for the government. So they're actually doing a lot of work, but it's not showing because ultimately you have to sell and bring the money. That has to hit the till.
Okay, all right. Well, let's get in Sunil Singhania, founder of Abacus Asset Manager, who joins us on the show. Hi, Sunil. Good morning. Good to see you in. In a few minutes, we'll be hearing from the finance minister and we'll have details with regard to the budget. What's top of mind on your expectation list?
So, it's very clear it's an interim budget, and going by the past, I don't think we're expecting too much. I think the reiteration of the stuff which they've been carrying on, that itself should be pretty good. We have seen over the last 6-7 years in particular, the mind frame of the government in pushing, planned expenditure, in ensuring that there is fiscal consolidation, as also, trying to kickstart the economy by, in between the budgets, propagating Make in India. I think all this is what we expect the budget speech to be all about. And it's an interim budget, so we don't expect at least major announcements, major changes.
A big income transfer, I mean, people are talking about it, an income transfer scheme, PM Kisan Samman getting increased to 8,000 or 10,000, and possibly, more schemes for affordable housing. Somebody was speaking about credit-linked subsidy coming back for affordable housing. Sunil, reactions? Do you think markets will react positively? Anything sector-wise?
There might be an announcement pertaining to all this, but I don't think they will announce the final contour.
Oh, okay.
The interim budget, we don't expect anything major to be announced in terms of a scheme. Maybe they might make an announcement that, obviously the Prime Minister has always been vocal about, housing for all, water for all, gas cylinders for all. So all that will continue. But we don't expect any final scheme per se to be announced. Yes, we are running a good sort of a scenario in the sense that tax collections have been higher than what was envisaged. Maybe, some of the socialist measures might be introduced or increased, as you rightly said. But beyond that, nothing major.
These announcements, right, directionally, there's announcement effect because there's elections also. Sunil, but, just on that point, there was a time a few years ago when these kind of measures the market would be very wary of, but not any longer. I think because of two reasons. One, there is acknowledgement that it is needed because of the K-shaped kind of recovery. And second, execution has been very good. So, you get the bang for the buck. Would you agree?
Also, I would agree with all the points you made, but additionally, it's not at the cost of fiscal consolidation. Earlier, this social measures used to be made without any credence to what the government balance sheet was looking like. I think now it is very clear they're balancing it well. And, markets have also changed, the economy has also changed. And I think, as you rightly said, people are realizing that we need to ensure that everyone grows. And to that extent, as long as the fiscal consolidation and the fiscal direction of going to 4.5% fiscal deficit is there, the markets are not going to take it negatively. The other thing, Prashant, is, we don't have any fuel subsidy now, any note. Fertilizer subsidy has come down significantly. So it's all about just basically maybe the food subsidy. I think it's fine.
Yep, exactly. Sajid, that's the point. Would it be actually positive? I mean, if there weren't income transfers, would it be negative? And, if there were income transfers, either Kisan Samman Nidhi or some other scheme, it would be actually good, isn't it? Both as an economist and as a market watcher, because consumption has been so weak. PFCE, personal final consumption expenditure, up just 4% at a time when GDP is up 7%. So, actually the absence is bad, you would say?
No, I agree. I think, we need consumption to broaden out. It's been driven by the upper end. And so having targeted welfare support, income support is important because the marginal propensity to consume is high at the bottom of the pyramid. So to the extent that this stokes demand, you then get more demand visibility, and that hopefully, along with the public investment, helps private investment. So yes, you do want targeted welfare support, as I mentioned. I think the larger issue, Lata, from a 3-year perspective is, expenditure multipliers tend to be higher than tax multipliers. So if we have to consolidate our deficit, we need to do so without sharp expenditure compression, which then again puts the onus on the revenue side. If we can consolidate the deficit by higher tax to GDP, higher asset sales, that's the least contractionary impact on growth going forward.
Okay. Sunil, any pockets of value you're picking up now?
I think it's a tough market, frankly, not too much of momentum. But the good thing about India is that, we have so many listed companies in so many sectors. So banks have not performed. We continue to be optimistic on the bank despite all the so-called headwind. But I think that is one segment where there is interest. And obviously, everything to do with development of infrastructure in India. I think there is still a long way to go for that.
Sunil, within the banks, what's it? Private or public sector banks? The private ones clearly have been lagging.
I think the larger private banks have also languished.
Yeah.
And the public sector banks, obviously, the top 4-5 names, I think there is still a lot of value.
Okay. Ashok, we have barely, 60 seconds? Your last wish.
I wish they say that on dividend distribution going forward, individuals will only be taxed, like in capital gains, at 10% or 15%.
Okay.
So instead of normal tax of 39%, that is the highest bracket, just bring it down to a fixed dividend tax in the hands of individuals.
Yeah, Sunil is also going to love that because that will be extremely market friendly if they were to announce. I don't know if I should risk another question with Sunil or... okay, we have a minute more. Sunil, if you have one wish, what would you want them to say? Will it be capex, income transfer? Just one, last one wish.
I think continue with what they're doing. Obviously, what Ashok said would be music to the ears, but continue with what they're doing.
Okay. Sajid, best tax buoyancy number? 1.1, 1.3, what? 13% growth in taxes is fine?
So this year, we're tracking 1.4. We're getting 13% on a nominal GDP of 9, but I think the tax has been quite conservatively budgeted. I would expect 1.1 on a nominal GDP of 10.5.
Okay, so 12% tax growth.
Around 12 and a nominal GDP of 10.5.
All right. I think it's 28 seconds, 27 seconds, so I won't risk another answer because I might have to cut into you all. So Sunil, Neelkant, Mahesh, Ashok, all of you, Sajid, thank you very much for being with us. We're going to touch base with most of you after we listen to the speech. As we get into the speech, what's the state of the markets? Markets actually not doing too badly at all. We are still outperformers in the global firmament. We have just cast aside what the US has done. No red cuts over here, except a bit on mid-caps, which anyway were overpriced. And there's a lot of green in the fixed income screen. None of all care about it, but the bonds are soaring. 7.13 on the 10-year. It's like a 5-6 basis points lower.
Yeah.
That's almost a rupee higher on bonds. And the rupee as well. Strong rupee. With that, we welcome the finance minister.